Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about all the series I've been reading this year that I would like to finish reading. Most fantasy readers are no strangers to starting a ton of series and then deciding which ones are worth carrying on with and which ones are worth calling it good at the first book or at some random point in the middle of the series. These are all series that I either started this year and would like to continue reading, or books that I did continue this year and would like to finish. The first series is The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. The story follows the real history of England before it was a united England, but following a fictional main character who has ties to both the King of England and also the Danes who have invaded. I think it does a really good job of following along a lot of the main historical events that happened around this time and a lot of the main figures. A lot of the characters are actually based on real people. A lot of the events are based on real things that happened, but it's all tied together in a cohesive narrative through the eyes of our fictional main character. I think that can be a tricky balance to keep, but I think it's done really well in the story. It does have a show adaptation, which I have already seen, so this isn't really a priority series because the story is exactly the same between the book and the show, at least from what I've seen so far. But it's definitely one I want to keep reading because I am enjoying it. The next series is Vlad Taltos by Stephen Brust. This is sort of an urban detective meets fantasy meets, I guess, mob style kind of gang wars. It follows our main character Vlad Taltos, who has worked his way up the ranks in the city and runs his own territory. There's a lot of trouble with race relations where he's basically an outsider in this place. He does have a lot of magic, some of which is unfamiliar to the people around him because of where he's from. And there's a lot of sort of detective style solving whatever's going on in that particular installment. I've read 3 of the books so far, and I've been enjoying the series. Some complicated storylines, but a lot of very engaging and interesting things going on that I haven't really seen in a lot of other fantasy books before. The next series is The Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. The first book in this I didn't really love. It follows Leah, who on her wedding day runs away, and there's sort of this love triangle that ensues between her, the prince she was supposed to marry, and the assassin who was sent to kill her. And it kind of just floats around between this weird love triangle where you don't really know who's who, which guy is the prince, which guy is the assassin. And then the last 10 pages really had me hooked in wanting to know what happened to Leah, which was a little unfortunate because I didn't really care that much throughout the whole story until the very ending, and then I felt very engaged and wanted to know what was going to happen. So I read the second book this year, and I really liked it. I thought it was a lot better than the first book, but now I really want to know how it ends, because if the ending really packs a punch like in the first book, I think the third book is going to be great. Or it could just be okay, but I won't really know until I read it. The next series is Book of the Ancestor by Mark Lawrence. This story follows Nona, who is a young girl who is sold off, and after getting into a bit of trouble, she is sentenced to death and saved on the day that she is supposed to be executed by a nun and brought to this convent where she is trained amongst a group of other young girls to become warrior nuns. They learn magic and martial arts and other skills. She sort of finds a home amongst all of these other girls and the nuns that look after them and teach them, but there's also always a looming danger. This was one of my favorite reads of the year, and I've been very eager to get onto the second book, but I've had so many other things on my radar, I've kind of just been putting it off, which is very unfortunate because I just found the world so interesting, and I found Nona to be such an engaging character, and I was very interested in finding out what happens to her and also uncovering what happened in her past where she ended up where she was. The next series is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This is a very different type of pace than I normally read, also following a young girl in her life. Anne is just so sweet and charming, and it's very much day in the life kind of story where it's just little tidbits of her young life as she's growing up. I think the book covered a few years of her life, but she is very young. But it's just a very sweet story. A nice little palate cleanser between all the longer fantasy books and grimdarks that I have been reading and enjoy reading, but it's nice to switch it up with a real change of pace here and there. So that's what I plan on continuing doing with this series, just reading it here and there, lighten the mood a bit. The next series is The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. I read the entire Shattered Sea trilogy this year and I really liked that, but The First Law seems to be the series that everybody talks about when they talk about Joe Abercrombie. So I read the first book, I really liked it, but it definitely feels like the setup of the story where you're meeting all of the characters and learning about what they're going to be doing. And I would imagine that the second book is the real meat of the story where they're actually going on their journey and doing things rather than just sort of meeting each other and gathering together. But even that part of the story was really interesting, so I'm looking forward to continuing this one. The next series is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This one wasn't really what I expected. It's about a cafe where you can go to another point in time to talk to someone. It follows 4 separate people who each have a different person that they want to talk to and just have one chance to say something, get some closure, figure something out. And they all have different reasons for doing this. They're all looking to see a different person, but all of their stories where I thought it would feel very separated and for separate stories within the book, it's all tied together by following the cafe staff as well and seeing how the cafe pulls all of these stories together. And I just thought it was a very interesting read. I've never read anything else like it, and there are 2 other books in the series, so I'm curious to see if those read similarly or if they have another twist to what's going on in the cafe. The next series is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. I picked up A Game of Thrones honestly expecting it to just be a lot of hype and maybe not be as good as everyone says, and I was wrong. I loved this book. I blew through it. This series is not short books at all, and I think I read it over 2 days. I was just so hooked on all of the characters and interested in the world and seeing what's going on with the Stark family. I loved everyone in that family. Ned Stark is the best boy, and all of the wolves and even the terrible characters, as much as they were terrible people, I think they were really well written as the villains and the people that you're supposed to hate. You get good reason to love the lovable characters and good reason to hate the hateable characters, and I'm very interested to continue on with this series and see what happens next. I just really liked the writing and found it very engaging and compelling story, and the hype was right. Sometimes it is. The next series is The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. This is a children's book, and it's so cute. I think there are 3 books in total, but the main character learns about these tea dragons, and they're basically little tiny dragons that each have some type of tea you can harvest off of them if you form a relationship with the dragon. and it's just so sweet and charming, and I like the art style within the book. And the tea dragons are just so adorable. I wish they were real. The next series is Sheets by Brenna Thumler. It follows this girl who basically by herself runs her family's laundromat, and she finds out that there is a ghost that's been visiting it at night and kind of making a mess. When they first meet, she's mostly just irritated at this ghost who is the ghost of a young boy, and they end up forming a unlikely friendship and getting to know each other and what's going on in each other's lives, or not life. He's a ghost. 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. And in this, our main character is cursed. Her 6 brothers are turned into cranes, and she is not allowed to speak a word because for every word that she says, one of her brothers will die. So she needs to find a way to break the curse and turn her brothers back into humans without being able to talk to anyone or ask for help, which turns out to be a very big problem when she learns how to break the curse. So while the story does conclude by the end of the first book, it also sets up for the beginning of the second book. And I had fun with the story. I thought it was a good read. And I'd like to know what happens in the next one. I'm not really sure. I think it's going to be a completely different setting. And hopefully one of the characters that I wished had a bigger role in this first book is going to play a bigger role in that second book. So I'll be looking forward to that. The next series is The Herdmans by Barbara Robinson. I read The Best Christmas Pageant Ever this month, and it's just a ridiculous middle grade about these siblings who are just the worst kids ever, but it was such a fun read. And she has 2, I think a holiday and then like a school year story following these kids, and I'll probably read those in the fall. But it was just such a fun read. I'd like to see what else happens with these kids in these stories. The next series is Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie. I've read, I think, 3 of the books from this series, and I'm not reading them in order. I don't read a lot of mysteries because I just always feel like I can never figure them out along with our main characters. There's always some weird twist that I just never saw coming, and I think Agatha Christie does that so well, where you're following the main character and you feel like you're solving the mystery along with them, but then there's one really important detail at the end that you missed, or I missed. I always miss the important detail. Maybe you figure them out, but not me. And then everything just comes together, and I just like her writing style. I think it's very clever without being too convoluted and overly complex, but it's also not blatantly obvious mysteries. And the last series I started this year that I want to finish is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I'm actually currently reading The Lost World, which is the second and final book in the series. I really liked this book. I was definitely anticipating it in a very anxious way because Jurassic Park is my favorite movie, and I was so worried that I wasn't going to love the book, and I really had nothing to worry about. I thought it was great. It's definitely not perfect, but it was a very engaging story. Had a lot of differences from the book to the movie, which is I also think is very interesting because things that work in a novel don't necessarily work on a screen and vice versa. So I think a lot of the changes that they made were really clever. And you get a little bit more background on the characters and the companies and the place in the book that I don't think they can really explain in the film version without over-explaining everything and making it really boring. And there's also a lot of different action that happens and just some subtle differences that I really liked seeing. So those are all the series I started this year that I am hopefully going to finish reading. That's all for me today. I'll see you next time. Bye.